Following the protests in Belgium, many Dutch children skipped school in February 2019 to protest against the minimal efforts made by the government against climate change. These protests were extensively discussed on Dutch television programs. Within television, there is always an ideology behind the information we receive. Discourse on the representation of children has always been a sensitive matter as, and I quote, "there are still too many situations in which minors are presented in a way that violates the fundamental rights of the child. In general, and I quote, children's perspectives and experiences have been disregarded in favor of those of adults. Children are often not taken seriously by adults on television. I chose to analyze the 4 programs Editie NL, Pauw Nieuws, Goedemorgen Nederland and De Wereld Draait Door to see which ideology is used to portray these protests. My findings show that the programs create an opposition between the adults and the children, the young activists are not treated as individuals and their political action is not acknowledged. My first program is Editie NL, which focuses on background news stories. The presenters state that protesters want more action to be taken by the government to combat global warming. Nevertheless, the presenters and narrators oppose this by asking the question of what the children do to fight climate change themselves. They show us a girl exclaiming that if everybody helps, we can make a difference, to which the narrator poses the question, but how? In the following interviews, we learn that the teens are not green enough themselves. At the same time, they are protesting against the government, which is not acknowledged in the narrative. Therefore, their activism is not recognized. The program also treats adults and children differently. Added up, the 3 interviewed adults get more speaking time than the 8 interviewed school children. The adults are introduced by the narrator or their name tag on the screen. The short interviews with the school children are also edited fastly next to each other, while each interview with an adult is placed between 2 shots of the general protest. The interview shots that feature adults are also more loosely framed than the tightly framed shots of the children. These elements show that the children are not acknowledged as individuals who have something meaningful to say, but as a group of people all being asked the same questions, while their political action is neglected. My second program is Pauw Nieuws, which features interviews with people on the street, in this case school children who are protesting for the climate in Amsterdam. The first interview starts off with the presenter commenting on a girl's looks. He describes her hair, lack of makeup and clothing. The camera points downward and in this frame we only see her legs. She is reduced to her looks and not taken seriously for what she has to say. In these clips, the interviewer takes up much space in the frame, which signifies his importance. The focus is not on what the person is saying, but on the reaction between them and the interviewer. Here, the footage is filmed from a high angle as he is standing above the boy. This shows us how he is in control of the situation. In this way, he makes fun of the activists. My third program is Goedemorgen Nederland, a morning news show. Here the presenter talks with 2 men who question how useful the protests are. The first speaker describes the protesters as kids, the cutest thing we have in the Netherlands. They place a shot of him saying this next to a shot of protesting children, which minimizes them to just being cute. He also insinuates that children are not rational, but the program does not feature any child speaking to oppose this. In one of the frames, a policeman is standing in front of the children as they walk. This composition signifies the distance between the 2 groups and the way the adult holds power over them. In this other frame, the faces of the men who state that the protest is useless dominate the frame compared to the small image of the protesters. This shows us the power dynamic. My final program is De Wereld Draait Door, a talk show about current events. 12 climate strikers were invited to talk about their protest. This is a very large number, especially compared to the small number of guests in other episodes. The teens had no place to move and looked stacked next to each other. Some did not fit on the table. 3 of them did not even get the chance to talk. Through this tight framing, they look uncomfortable and are not acknowledged as individuals, but just as a group. Even though the teens get time to speak, the program makes us look at them through the point of view of the adults at the table. They are stuck between the 2 men as they are being judged by the adults. This again creates the opposition between the adults and the school children. In conclusion, these 4 programs demonstrate how youth activists are represented in Dutch television. The children are not taken seriously for their activism, there's an opposition between the adults and children, and they are not treated as individuals.